Welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. In this podcast, we talk about books, interview authors, and we discuss their journey to becoming published. Each one has a different but amazing story. My hope is to encourage people to keep reading good books and to help authors find their audience and inspire everyone in their journey, whatever that might be. Welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. Welcome back to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Charles Dickens. So for those of you longtime listeners of the show, you know he's my favorite author. I find an excuse to talk about him in just about every episode. But today it's going to be all about him, so no excuses to not talk about him. I have a special guest with me. He's an author. His name is Jesper Soerensen, and he's just written a book called Charles Dickens, The Stories of His Life. And it introduces you to Dickens's novels and stories, as well as interweaving it along with a biography of Dickens. And by reading it, you can see maybe some of the events of his life that influenced what he wrote. So Jesper, welcome to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast.
Thank you so much, Art. I'm excited to be here and chat with you about our favorite author, Charles Dickens.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to be careful. We just don't end up talking all night, you know.
That could happen.
Yeah, it could.
It could happen. Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I do a podcast, though. It's good. Probably most of us would be new to your book and who you are. So could you just go ahead and tell us a little bit about who you are and how did you come to write this book?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. To start with who I am, I'm originally from Denmark. I lived in Denmark most of my life, and I moved here to the US 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. I had started writing this book while I was living in Denmark. I had just written about 4 chapters of it when I moved over here, and then I finished most of the book over here. And the book is, as you told it so eloquently, more than I could come up with. The book is both an introduction to each of the novels each of the major novels that Dickens wrote in his lifetime. There are 15 chapters, one for each of his novels, and there are 2 parts to each chapter. So each chapter deals with the particular novel, and there's excerpts from the book in the chapter and a brief synopsis, and I tell the reader what inspired him to write the book and how the book was received in his own time and where it stands today in the Dickens canon. Mm-hmm. And then the second part of it is the sort of chronological, biographical aspect of his life. So in each chapter, we follow Dickens in his own time and see what events took place in his life, what was he occupied with besides the writing during the composition of the book, which for most of the novels was a 2-year period. So if you read the book chronologically, you don't have to. You can just start with whatever. If you're interested in a particular novel, then you can go to the chapter that deals with that particular novel. If you are new to Dickens and you want to try out one of his novels, then each chapter is sort of meant to be an introduction to the novel and something to raise the reader's interest in the novel before beginning it. Mm-hmm. And there are no spoilers, so they can be safely read each chapter before you read the book. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, and I appreciated that. Yeah, because I know I could already hear people asking, well, I don't want to read it if it's going to spoil something, you know.
Yeah, excited because I know that I often, when I buy a Dickens novel, there's often an introduction to the novel, but right. Usually they will recommend that you don't read even though it's called an introduction, that you save it until after you read the novel because it's full of spoilers. So right. I deliberately didn't want to have any spoilers in it, so that because it's sort of meant to guide people to Dickens' works, and people can sort of see. Maybe they want to read all of his novels, but maybe they just have some particular novels in mind, and so it's sort of it's meant to be like a companion to reading a Dickens novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very handy reference book.
Exactly.
and really fun to read too. But you're as they say, you're preaching to the choir here. I I find anything about Dickens interesting, but
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to hear it. Interesting because it's because you, as somebody who knows a lot about Dickens, uh, I'm happy to hear that you still found it interesting and maybe found some interesting perspectives. So because I hope that it's also a book that appeals to the Dickensians, to the people who already know and love Charles Dickens, as well as it's also supposed to be. I wanted it to be a book that would hopefully find some new readers as well. Maybe there are readers out there who hear about Dickens because he's kind of everywhere. That's how it was for me as well. But maybe you don't know quite where to start. And I think that if you have a biographical knowledge about Dickens, that makes it so much more interesting to read his novels as well. And I wanted the book to be. I had started writing the book back in 2018. I sort of started writing and planning it out, and I thought, okay, well, this book is going to be a celebration of Dickens's work and life, and I'll have it out in time for his 150th anniversary of his death in 2020. But I, of course, greatly underestimated how long it would take to write it, and how long it would take to have it published, and also how many disruptions I would have along the way. So so it didn't come out until the end of last year. But still, I wanted it to be like a celebratory sort of book of his life, even though it didn't come out in time for his anniversary.
Yeah, I think 2020 pretty much just ruined everybody's plans. So
yeah, I think so too.
That's about that. That's right. But yeah, now in your studying, did you find out things about Dickens that surprised you?
Not too much actually, because I had already, read several times most of the major biographies written about Dickens. But I think that reading it and researching it. Made me sort of see him in different ways. There were some parts of his character that when I first read the biographies, that I didn't really think too much of. Some of the more problematic things about his character, I tended to think in the beginning, because I was so amazed by his life and what he and his great character and. So I thought he was very fascinating, and thought that he could almost do that he had very few flaws. And I think that rereading the biographies and writing this book and doing the research, it made me realize that some of his that he had sort of greater flaws than I had first seen. So I saw more like problematic things. In some of his views or in some of his actions, I think, and I think the major one of his personal flaws being how he was acting at the breakdown of his marriage and how he treated Catherine.
Those are always the tough parts to read when I'm reading a biography, and I certainly don't want to excuse bad behavior. Then there's things you can say about, well, the time period was different, this and that, and I get those, but it was just really terrible, and so he becomes a flawed person, which in some way makes him even more real in that sense.
And I also think that reading through his biographies, and I also think that in my own book, I think that once his life, it can be distressing to read about what happened when his marriage broke down and all his friendships broke down as well, because he was being very, very sort of paranoid and angry if his friends didn't support him 100%. So I think that it's not always it can be a bit distressing to read about what happened, but I also think that this later end part of his life, when it becomes more where he has more of a double life, and those things happen. I think both his life biographically and also his books, they become sort of more interesting from that point of view. There's more like light and darkness that is balanced throughout the books, just as there is in his life. So I think certainly that his later novels, they offer a lot of things for interpretation and things to delve into.
Yeah, I've often wondered about his book, A Tale of Two Cities, if he wasn't trying to work out some issues with himself in that book, all about redemption and doing something good for somebody in that sense. I wonder, that's just a pet theory, but
yeah. And I guess this is also at a time when his mind was really in turmoil from
right.
Having just met Ellen Ternan shortly before, and
right.
maybe was about to begin his relationship with her. And
yeah,
there's certainly a strong book and a strong love story in that book as well.
Right. And some other people I know that we've talked about Dickens and things, and they've talked about it. And I know there's one YouTube channel I follow that she did a paper in university, I think it was, that showed that Dickens at the end of his life, his female characters had become more rich and stronger and more developed than his earlier female characters. And so now I go back and read that with that in mind, and it's like, oh yeah, I can see that, that he's learning, he's growing. Yeah, he's flawed for sure. We all are, but it's one of those things where, reading old literature, you're always going to find some kind of problematic point of view or problematic people. And you kind of have to take the good with the bad, and point out the bad when it's bad, but celebrate the good. And I think that can be a good balance. At least that's my approach.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. I think that you still have to I think it's still important to read Dickens, and there's certainly more good and more compassion and goodness in Dickens, I think, than the opposite. Even though the opposite comes out sometimes in his private life, we see it, but I think he's not to be missed, even in spite of his flaws and problematic things in his life.
Right.
And I also think it's interesting what you said about his female characters becoming more interesting and more alive in his later books. I agree 100% with that. And I'm sure you're also thinking about that maybe Ellen Ternan had an influence in this, because she was certainly she seemed to be a very intelligent and strong, and also a very bold woman. Almost just as bold as Dickens was, if not as bold as you see in her later life. So I think that she's an interesting person in his life, and I think that she definitely affected some of his characters.
Yeah, I do too. In all that you've read about him, do you have a favorite biography or one other than your own book, of course?
I do. I think that Michael Slater's the big biography he wrote, I think it came out just in time for the bicentennial.
I believe so. Yeah,
12 years ago. And I've read also, so that was his big biography, but I read his other books on Dickens as well. I think he's just one of the most incredible of Dickens biographers. But I also have a very special place for the first biographies that I read about Dickens, because those were the ones that really got me. When I read those, then it was just then I was just sold onto Dickens, and I wanted to read everything about him and everything that he had written. And those were the biographies by Fred Kaplan. I don't know if you read his biography of Dickens.
I don't recall if I have or not. But I own it. I just don't know if I've read it. Okay, I'd have to check. Yeah. I've got a big shelf of biographies and stuff I'm working my way through. So
yeah, that's a good one. And it's kind of like, it's not too massive. So you can sort of, it's a big biography, but it's not like, that big biography by Peter Ackroyd, which was the second one I read, and I loved his biography, and I read the unabridged version, which is just massive. I think it was like 1,200 pages long. But those were the two first biographies I read, and I thought they were really, really good.
Yeah. Okay, hold on. I was just checking here. Yeah, I have read the Kaplan biography. I guess it didn't make that big of an impression on me. I don't know. Maybe I need to reread it. But yeah, I've read the Ackroyd one. I enjoyed, but Michael Slater's was I think the first one I read.
Okay, that's a good start.
Of his biography, and I loved his study, the whole book. It was fascinating. And so, I went out and I think I've found pretty much every book I could find by Michael Slater. I've tried to get my hands on. So
yeah, that's I've never read anything by him that wasn't good and insightful. And I think it's a very good. I think it's such a good combination to have both in Michael Slater, both a scholar, but also a Dickensian. So I think that combination is really a good combination. It makes it very interesting to read for a person who loves Dickens.
Right. Yeah. I know they say you have to try to be a little unbiased in different things, and I think he can. But I really hate reading a biography where it just seems like the writer does not like the person they're writing about.
Yeah.
It's like, why did you spend so much time writing this book if you're just going to trash the guy,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's just a very evident love of his stories in what he writes that really is a good balance for me. I enjoy what he writes. Yeah.
I think so too, because I think also a lot of scholars, if the scholars are not particularly fond of Dickens as such, then I think a lot of them really have a problem with Dickens because they can't get over that the fact that his sort of lack of structure in his books and sort of so a lot of people sort of condemn him for not having a very good structure. So it's kind of like when he wrote his books, they were just kind of like blowing up in his hands, and he would just let them go where they wanted to. Sometimes it seems like that.
I like that. Yeah. That's about right. Well, and the way he wrote, all of them were done serially. And so you do get, especially in his earlier ones, I tend to notice more, just very episodic little chunks. And I'm currently rereading Nicholas Nickleby, and I'm kind of going slower through it, and I'm being more observant as to when, what the parts would have been released in. So like I think it was the first 4 chapters, and then chunks of 3 different chapters throughout our each episode, if you will. And I'm like, I can see it now. This is really fun. I did that with Great Expectations a couple of years ago, and that was a lot of fun to read it like that, just 3 chapters a week, and kind of got the sense of what it would have been like.
Yeah. And sometimes that's almost, especially with the longer novels, it might be an advantage if they were read like that today, because I think a lot of people are daunted when they see such a long novel as Dickens were, close to like 800 pages, 1,000 pages.
Right. So, this is a monster. How am I going to read all this? Yeah.
Yeah. But it's funny with this. Nicholas Nickleby. That's such a fun novel. I love that that novel. But it also has, it's kind of in his early career when he was writing in serials, and he had already gotten good at it. But it's very funny to see that all of a sudden he sort of he runs out of space for that monthly number, and then he just sort of inserts a story that has nothing to do at all with the plot.
Yeah.
And he just sort of gets the character together to tell a tale, and then then he gets the story that's then gonna fill out the number. So that's quite that's quite.
Yeah, he did that with I know he did that in Pickwick Papers too.
Yeah.
That one was funny because the one about the goblin who stole the sexton, right before that, he's writing, he's like, I realize that this chapter got really long, so we're going to wait till the next chapter to tell you the story.
Yeah.
It's kind of a authorial insertion there. It was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you first start reading Dickens? What's your history with him in that regard?
I cannot remember the exact year, but I can sort of remember what led me to it. I'm thinking it was maybe like 15 years ago that I started reading Dickens. Mm-hmm. The first novel I read of Dickens was Great Expectations, and it was kind of a random choice. I went down to my bookstore and I had the idea that I wanted to read that book. That was just the title that I sort of knew of or had heard of. So I thought, okay, this seems to be like a famous book of Dickens. It could be a good one to start with. And I read behind on the back cover, and it said that it was considered one of his finest novels. So I thought, okay, I'll start with that. Mm-hmm. And I read that novel, and this was my first time. I had to get used to Dickens' style and used to the language. So I didn't get as much out of it as I would when rereading it and after having read many of the other novels. But I remember after reading the novel thinking, feeling I thought it was a good novel, and thought I was very surprised at how modern it seemed still for such a, it seemed like almost a contemporary novel in a way. So I thought the novel had changed much more than it had over the course of the years. So I was kind of like impressed with how modern it felt to read, even though it was such an old book. And then, but I had no intention of reading any more of Dickens, or I had not sort of gotten truly fascinated with him yet. And then it was kind of like I think the universe sort of conspired to get me interested in Dickens, because the other writers, the other books that I was reading at the time, they kept, in praise of those books, more modern writers. I would often see Dickens mentioned as praise for these writers. It was like, oh, this is almost like Dickens, or it's very Dickensian. So that sort of led me towards Dickens. And then what really turned me into a Dickens fan was that I went down to my local library, and they had like a sale. They were selling out of some of their English titles, for like 80 cents for a book and something like that. And then I came across a book called An Interview with Anne Rice, and I had never read Anne Rice and didn't really had any intention of reading her, but I thought, okay, this could be, I can pay 80 cents for an interview with a successful writer to hear how is her writing journey and all. Mm-hmm. And then she was talking, apparently she was a big fan of Dickens. So she started talking about Dickens, and then she mentioned how she loved those biographies about Dickens by Fred Kaplan and by Peter Ackroyd. So having read that, I went out and bought those biographies. And then, as I mentioned earlier, after having read those biographies, I just got so fascinated with Dickens that I wanted to read everything about him. And so that's kind of how my introduction to Dickens began. So yeah, I'm curious to hear about you, how you discovered.
Well, yeah, well, it was a dark and stormy night. No, my journey with him goes way back to being a kid and falling in love with A Christmas Carol. The story, the movie versions is how I first experienced that, and then as I got into my early teens, I really wanted to try to read one of his novels. My reading, I was a voracious reader, and my reading tastes were just not being challenged, with the young adult literature at the time. And so I had heard a commercial on the radio or TV about the Great Expectations. It was a mini series, and I thought that sounded like a really cool book. So I went to the library, got it, and started reading it. And I didn't get through it. It was challenging. So it was what I was looking for, but I had to kind of put it aside and to say I don't know if I can handle this yet. But what I read at the beginning, I loved. Just that story of Pip and the marshes being so atmospheric, and the the criminal, the convict capturing him. It was just really compelling. But I think I was 12 or 13 at the time. So it was still a little bit hard for me at that age.
Yeah.
So I kind of kept him in mind, and a couple years later, I actually didn't read A Christmas Carol for the first time, which I will still say that's a great way to be introduced to Dickens. I know it's a holiday story, and you don't think of it as, well, I think of it as great literature, but some might be dismissive of it, but it's got everything you can expect in Dickens. It's just compressed, and it's easy to understand. Everyone's familiar with the story, and all those things help. So I read that, and I'm like, okay, yeah, this is the guy for me. This is beautiful. Yeah. So then I did get back to read Great Expectations. I was later and was able to read it, and then actually didn't really start reading him more heavily until I was an adult in my early 20s. I feel like my brain finally caught up to being able to comprehend him. And my wife, when we got married, my wife and I read A Tale of Two Cities together. This is before we had kids.
Oh,
we had plenty of free time, so we read that to each other off and on. And it was after that I was just like, this is great. This is really good.
Yeah,
yeah. And then from that point on, I've just been slowly reading through all of his books, and here probably in the last 10 years, I've really put in effort to try to get through everything, which I've gotten through all of his main novels, most of his shorter works. I've just devoured them and reread.
Yeah.
He is possibly one of the only authors I've enjoyed rereading more than even the first time I've read.
Yeah. Same here. I feel the same way too. Yeah. I think it's wonderful that you were reading it together, you and your wife. Yeah.
She, I think that's probably her favorite Dickens novel. It's right now, it's my favorite one. Ask me a different day, I might tell you a different one, but
yeah.
But yeah, we both enjoy reading him. And really, he, after I've read a lot of him, it then drew me into reading other Victorian writers. So now I'm just a fanatic. So yeah, long story short, it took a while for my brain to mature, but once it did, at least I hope it did. It's just, they're so good. And my perspective reading them now, I'm in my 40s. I'm finding it to be different than when I was reading them in my 20s. Even the characters I connect with are different. I'd change, my views on the book change.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also think that for me, also personally, as you talk about that, how your mind matures and then you appreciate more. Mm-hmm. I think also the older that you get, and you sort of grasp more, of how society works, and different kinds of philosophies and ideas and those kind of things. The more knowledge you get about it, the more you also know about Dickens. For instance, the first time that I read Hard Times, for instance, I didn't really understand a lot about what was utilitarianism, and I didn't really understand much about sort of the society in England at the time. And so that understanding sort of came later by reading more biographies, and just by just by my interest in the time. So having gathered more knowledge about things also made the books sort of made me appreciate the books in a different way.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, this is where rereading comes in too. That it's so much it's even better because now I know the story more or less, and I can really then begin to dig deeper going back through, digging deeper in, finding things I missed the first time. There's just so much.
Yeah.
I'm rereading Nicholas Nickleby right now. I'm reading it through and thinking, I don't remember this book being this funny. And this has probably been the most enjoyable of the times I've read it. I'm really enjoying it this time. So it could possibly be going up my favorites list.
Yeah, it's an extremely funny book. I love it.
Yeah.
And I will feel so much joy when I get to read it the next time again, just knowing all the fun that awaits.
Mm-hmm.
The same with the Pickwick Papers. I can just read that book over and over and over again,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just going to be like Christmas. It's starting that story over again, just knowing how much fun it's going to be, how many laughs. So,
if I had a top 5, Pickwick would be in the top 5 for sure.
Yeah, sure.
Do you have a top few favorites? It can be hard to choose, I know.
Yeah, it'll be harder to choose what would be in the bottom five than the top 5 because I think most of them are so really great. But certainly Pickwick is up there. But I think my very favorite novel is probably Bleak House. So I think it's a fantastic novel. I think so. I think Bleak House and David Copperfield and the Pickwick Papers are among my favorites. And of the shorter novels, I think A Tale of Two Cities and Great Expectations are favorites probably. Yeah.
Honestly, those are pretty much my top favorites as well.
Yeah.
I'm really, I don't know if I really have any interesting choices. I mean, I would probably put Little Dorrit in the top 5 as well.
Yeah.
That one was kind of a surprise to me. It's not one I hear talked about a lot, but when I first read it, I'm like, I just really, really enjoyed it. And then shortly after that, I went and I saw the BBC miniseries of Little Dorrit, and it kind of maybe was the 1-2 punch there of the novel, and the miniseries was so good.
That was very good. Yeah, I enjoyed that too. And I also now that that you mentioned the Little Dorrit should be there, I agree. And now I also feel regret for not having included Dumpy and Son or Our Mutual Friend. I think those are also very, very, very good novels.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there can only be 5 in the top 5.
That's right. Yeah.
I wish there could be 7 novels in the top 5.
Right.
But,
yeah, I have like 20 in my top 5 favorite books. It's fine.
Yeah.
Hey, we make our own rules here. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Dombey and Son. That was one that it was a harder read for me. I don't know if it was just the time of life, but I felt like some of it was really dragging. And then I know I reread it once before, and it was still kind of.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed that one very, very much. So I think it's and especially the beginning, it's very it's a very it's funny how that it's a very funny novel, even though it's actually describing some tragic circumstances.
Yeah.
In the Dombey family, and I think that he kind of. I remember that there's this long chapter about the little Paul Dombey's christening party, and it's so dark, but it's so hilarious at the same time. And I remember reading, that in his letters that he was reading this story aloud to his English friends in Switzerland, where he was living at the time, and they were just practically rolling around on the floor, roaring with laughter over this chapter. And I think it's. I think it's a very funny. I think his humor works really well in this book, even though and the humor works well to describe something that's dark and tragic. So I think that through his own sort of satirical take on it or humoristic view of this family, he sort of manages to get into the sort of this the dynamics of this very dysfunctional family,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he gets it through his humor. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's
What I remember most about that is some of his beautiful descriptions, especially of with Paul Dombey, and no spoilers here, but there's a significant chapter in Paul's young life, and the ending of that, it was like, wow, that was really beautifully written. And then there's another chapter towards the end of the book, as the plots are starting to wrap up, that I found to be really one of the most beautiful things he's written. Florence and Walter, and just their interaction towards the end. That was just beautifully expressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, everyone. I'm going to spoil a 200-year-old book, but but it just, it was. So I'm really curious to get back to it. I kind of made myself a challenge that like this year, next year, I wanted to reread some of his books that I haven't read very much. The Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations, David Copperfield. I've read those 4 or 5 times. I just really love those books. But then like Barnaby Rudge, I only have read once, and that was 15, 20 years ago, I think, maybe even longer. So I'm kind of excited because I don't really remember what happened. So it's like I get to read it all over again for the first time. So I just remember thinking, this is better than I thought it would be.
Yeah, that's also a book that I think almost nobody knows about, unless they know a lot about Dickens. I think it's one of the more sort of forgotten or obscure books. Of his career. I also don't think too many people know Nicholas Nickleby, even though that's a very that's a very admirable book.
One that I struggle with is Oliver Twist, and that could be he's still trying to figure out himself as an author.
Definitely,
It almost feels like Oliver's not the main character in his story.
I agree. That's my least favorite of Dickens' books. I also think that it's that he was kind of he was kind of trying his way, and it's such a strange contrast to, because he was writing the Pickwick Papers at the same time, and so you have the Pickwick Papers, which was just so comical, and then you have this Oliver Twist that has it's more dark, but I think it's also a very uneven book, and it's not. I don't think it's his best work. And I think the part of the book that I enjoyed the most was probably the part that he wrote before he knew that he was writing a novel. So at the beginning of the book, when it was just sort of some satirical sketches about a boy from the workhouse, I thought those first chapters were very good and interesting. And then he sort of weaves this sort of melodramatic tale that I think it's a little bit. I didn't enjoy it too much.
That book would probably be near the bottom of my list.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what's interesting is how he was able to write both Pickwick and Oliver at the same time. Towards the end, one is so funny, the other gets pretty dark near the end. And it's like, how did you keep those straight? I don't know. He was a master.
Yeah.
Now, do you have any favorite characters in Dickens novels that you enjoy reading?
Oh yeah. I mean, I have many, because Dickens is all about the characters. So I think his I think my favorite characters are probably a lot of my favorite characters are sort of his minor characters, because I think that he's great in the details as well. So gosh, it's gonna be hard to choose. I actually think if I were to pick a main character that I really liked, that is throughout the book, I would say that Pip in Great Expectations is a great character, because he was so, compared to David Copperfield, Pip was more flawed, and I love him even more for that as a character. So I think that that stands out as a as a true and trustworthy character
Mm-hmm.
that I really like. But I also really like some of his. I like his eccentric characters and his minor characters. So I really like. I love Betsy Trotwood
Mm.
and
Yeah.
David Copperfield and I love Micawber in Copperfield. He's not a minor character,
Right.
and he shouldn't be. I think he's a great character as well, and I think it's very. I think I think it was a very great sort of way for Dickens to portray his father in that book,
Mm-hmm.
but in a kind and comical way that still got the tragedy of his situation across.
Mm.
And then it was not until after his father had died that he created a different kind of uh, characterization of the same person with Mr. Dorrit in Little Dorrit,
Mm-hmm.
of course. So I thought he did a very good job of making a funny character out of his father and his mother through the Micawbers, without exposing them or anything, or without writing or what we today call auto fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a very good. Yeah, I liked Mr. and Mrs. Micawber as characters as well.
I remember when I was first reading David Copperfield. See, yeah, I was an adult by that point, but I remember when he finally meets the Micawbers, I was just so glad. I'm like, oh, here seems like somebody nice who's going to help take care of him, and then now as I reread it just was it last year or a couple of years ago, I thought, well, maybe there's a little bit of are they trying to take a little bit of advantage of him or something? I don't know. It's very layered.
Yeah, they are in a way, they're a little bit despicable in
Right.
the way that they are sort of they are a little bit taking advantage of him and treating him as if he was an adult.
Yeah.
Do you have some favorite characters?
Definitely. Yeah. I would probably say Scrooge is one of them.
Yeah.
Just it's not really a deep answer, I guess, but I love the story so much. And
Oh, I see.
his emotional journey, his redemption arc, it's really compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've read that story more than 20 times now. I guess by the time I die, I'm going to have it memorized. I was thinking like you, I like a lot of his minor characters. They can tend to be very exaggerated, but they're funny. And I still say, I know somebody who acts like that, maybe not quite as exaggerated, but yeah, I can see real life people in that and them. Betsy Trotwood is a favorite for sure. I'm again in Nicholas Nickleby, Newman Noggs. I found this time through Ralph Nickleby's assistant, whatever you call him. There's a lot happening in his life, and I don't know. This time through, he's really jumped out of the page for me, and I'm being more aware of what he's been doing, kind of behind Ralph's back to help Nicholas and his family. And I think that's really really neat to read that and see him doing that.
Yeah.
Boy,
there's so many.
I know. Yeah, I could pick a favorite from each book. Let's,
Yeah. And I think I don't even know. I think somebody has counted, how many characters are in Dickens all in all. I don't know. Is it something like 2,000 characters, 3,000 characters, and everything he wrote? I'm not sure, but it's certainly a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You can have. I have like this whole encyclopedia of of characters and all this from this book. So that's a lot to choose from.
Yeah. I know it's. Yeah, I think it would be easier to find a few from each book, to be honest. That's
yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Both my wife and I really enjoy the character Sam Weller from Pickwick Papers. He's a fan favorite.
Yeah, he almost carries that book, right? The book became really successful after he was introduced. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's funny. That's one of those stories where authors will say, you know, this character really came to life and kind of took over the story. I mean, that's almost exactly what happened.
Yeah. I love Mr. Winkle's all of his mishaps.
Yeah.
He was doing his sports.
The ice skating scene is probably one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And my wife found a reprint of an illustration from Pickwick Papers of that scene of Mr. Winkle on the ice with Sam Weller. And anyway, she got that for me for Christmas one year, and I'm like, oh, this is great.
Oh, that's wonderful. Is it? I can't remember when Mr. Pickwick breaks through the ice.
Yeah.
You know, he falls through the ice, and then who is it who runs? Is it Snodgrass or Winkle who runs up to the main house and yells "Fire, fire!" After Pickwick falls through the ice? So
right.
Yeah.
Tragedy or comedy or a combination of both. Dickens is a author worth reading still. So.
For sure.
Yeah. Now, do you have any future plans to write more, or have you written anything else, you know, that we might want to check out?
I'm working on 2 books actually. I'm working on a book about G.K. Chesterton, who you possibly know for because he's also very much of a Dickensian and one of the best. A lot of people, and myself included, think that he's one of the best critics of Dickens that ever lived. I don't know if you have read Chesterton's books on Dickens.
No, I have one, at least one that he wrote. I guess about Dickens. I actually just recently found it, just about a month ago, so it's on my shelf. It's on my list to read though. Yeah.
So he's a very interesting person as well. He was very, very famous in his own time. He was born a few years after Dickens died, and his grandfather was actually sort of a friend of Dickens. He was working in the prison system, and Dickens used him as an authority for some when he was creating that. I believe that he used Chesterton's grandfather to come up with a system for the inmates of this Urania cottage that he was establishing. This home in London for homeless or women or women who are falling into prostitution. So I'm kind of working on a book about him and what he's writing about Dickens as well. And then I'm working on a collection of essays about Denmark. So none of them are out yet. I have one of my so there's going to be some coming out. One of the essays are going to come out this summer in Michigan Quarterly Review, and but so I don't know when the book will come out, either of the books. So they're still in progress.
Works in progress then. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. G.K. Chesterton. I know because he wrote the Father Brown stories too. Is that right? He did.
Yeah, and I have actually never read the Father
me
Brown
either.
stories. That's kind of. I've been. It didn't appeal so much to me, even though I know that those are some of his most famous books. But I was more interested in his work in his nonfiction and his journalism and he wrote a lot of biographies about writers, not just Dickens, but
because I found I guess it's a biography he wrote of Dickens, and I like I said, I found it at a bookstore, and I thought it was just funny. I'm more excited about finding that than I would be about reading, one of his mysteries or something. So, yeah.
I really think I think that if you haven't read Chesterton, and I think it's gonna blow you away. I think you're gonna be very I think that's gonna be a sort of a revelation. I know that a lot of the big biographers about Dickens, including Peter Ackroyd, also thought that Chesterton was really the one who really captured the soul and the essence of Dickens. And I agree with that. There are two. I don't know which one of them you got, but there's one where he sort of wrote a full biography about Dickens, and then there's one that's sort of a collection of essays about each of the novels. Kind of a little bit like I've done with my book, but and they're both really great to read.
Sure.
And they're also in the public domain. They're quite easy to get.
Yeah.
Afford.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to double check. I think it was just the biography. But my books are downstairs, so otherwise.
Yeah. But I'm sure you're gonna enjoy that one.
Well, good. I hope I'll get to it. My wife makes fun of me because sometimes I'll come home with a book about Dickens, and I'll be at a used bookstore or something, and she's like, "There is another one you haven't read yet." I said, "Well, I've read just about everything." And now I'm enjoying reading about him.
Yeah.
And just as much. And I kind of joke with her. I said, well, you won't let me move to England to, study him in university or something. So I got to do what I can do,
Yeah. That sounds like a good compromise.
Yeah. So she said, well, yeah, it's a lot cheaper, I guess. So
yeah,
I've got enough books. I should probably write something. I have a good resource library here, so
yeah.
Got to be careful of our time here, but
we could go on and on.
Yeah, well, I'll have to have you back sometime for sure. But do you have a website people can find you at, and where can they find your book?
Yeah, well, I don't have a website as of yet. But I have all kinds of news about the book and what I write on my social media. And my book can be found pretty much everywhere that you go and look for books, where you buy a book. So it's on bookshop.org and Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Target. So wherever you go and buy your books, you should be able to find it.
Yeah, I found it easy enough. It's on Amazon. Yeah. If you can't find it, you're not trying. So I'll make sure to have a link in the show notes too for folks if they want to check that out and get your book. I think it's a great addition to your Dickens library. So, well, Jesper, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for coming on and chatting about Dickens with me. And best of luck to you and all that you've got going on here in the future.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
You bet. All right, and everyone else, have a good night and happy reading, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Bookshelf Odyssey podcast. You can check out the show notes to find out all the information, links, and books that we referenced in today's episode. If you'd like to help support the show, I'd love for you to share on your social medias, tell your bookworm friends, share with your author friends, and help us get the word out. If you'd like to help out in a financial way, there are links in the show notes where you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. You can find all episodes at bookshelfodyssey.com. And please follow us on my social medias. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Follow us there for more bookish content. And so until next time, happy reading, everyone, and take care.